Welcome back, deep divers. Today we're heading to a place, well, a place that's been at the heart of three major world religions for millennia. Temple Mount in Jerusalem.
Yeah, it's one of those places, just packed with history, layer upon layer of meaning. And we're lucky enough to have some amazing insights from Dr. Jody Magnus, a real expert in Jerusalem's archaeology.
I mean, you send over that episode with Dr. Magnus and it's wow. It's incredible. And today we're going to, try to uncover how this seemingly small hill, it doesn't even have its own water source, became like the center, the heart of Jerusalem.
It's captivating, isn't it? The story of Temple Mount, its power, faith, and history. Just so rich, almost hard to grasp.
You got that right. Okay, so to get us started, let's try to paint a picture of where we actually are. Dr. Magnus describes Jerusalem as like a mountain town, built on this landscape of valleys and hills.
And Temple Mount itself, well, it sits on this rocky outcrop north of the original settlement, the city of David. It's interesting, though, even though we call it Mount, it's not actually the highest point.
Yeah, you'd think that the highest point, that would be the natural spot for a settlement, right?
You would, but Temple Mount, even though it's not the tallest, it dominates the city of David. Visually, symbolically, it's like the location itself had this inherent power, drawing people to it.
Really makes you think about how geography shapes history, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And speaking of which, this site, it's incredibly important to, well, to Judaism, to Christianity, to Islam.
Yeah.
But Dr. Magnus, she makes it clear that their relationships at Temple Mount, they're all unique.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what makes it even more interesting. For Christianity, the connection is mainly tied to the destruction of the Second Temple, fulfilling Jesus's prophecy. But for Judaism and Islam, its significance is it's ongoing, right? It's intensely spiritual. It's like woven into the fabric of daily life.
And that religious significance, I mean, that makes doing any sort of archaeological digging, it makes it almost impossible, right? I mean, you've got the Dome of the Rock there, Al-Aqsa Mosque, and just the sanctity of the entire area. You can't just start digging.
Exactly. It's a highly sensitive situation. Dr. Magnus does mention some work, though, that was done, clearing fills under Al-Aqsa Mosque. But even that, it wasn't traditional excavation, more like carefully sifting through layers with immense respect for what everything means, religiously, of every action.
So much of what we know comes from, well, from piecing together historical texts, analyzing what little we can excavate, and really thinking about the logistics of the city itself. For example, Dr. Magnus talks about how important water was in Jerusalem's history.
Oh, absolutely. Water in a desert environment, it's everything. It's life. She focuses on the Gihon spring. That was the city's lifeline.
Yeah.
And the ancient inhabitants, they built these amazing tunnel systems around the spring, ensuring that they could, access the water, especially important during sieges, when the city might be under attack.
It sounds like something out of an Indiana Jones movie, those tunnels.
Yeah.
But that makes you think, right, Temple Mount, this crucial location, it didn't even have its own natural water source.
Right. It would rely entirely on cisterns, collecting rainwater. So visually, yeah, it dominated the landscape. But without that water, it makes it much less likely that it would have been where people settled first.
Fascinating, isn't it? Like, they chose a strategically important location, but then had to overcome this major obstacle. And Dr. Magnus explains, according to the Bible, this is where King Solomon, he built the first temple back in the 10th century BC.
And while we can't excavate there, the cool thing is we can look at other temples, from that era, from that time period. And that gives us a pretty good idea of what Solomon's temple might have looked like.
So what are we picturing here?
Okay, picture a rectangular building, flat roof, multiple courtyards, an altar for sacrifices, and then the most sacred space, the Holy of Holies, where they kept the Ark of the Covenant.
Just incredible to think about. All that history, unfolded in that one spot. And of course, we know that the first temple, it was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC. But then, under Persian rule, they built the second temple, right? On the same site.
Yeah, it's a constant cycle, isn't it? Destroyed and rebuilt. And each time, each new version takes on new meaning, becomes even more important to the people who revere it.
Speaking of layers, I got to bring up the Western Wall. I mean, such an iconic image, right? And I think a lot of people, they believe it's like the last remaining piece of the Second Temple.
Yeah. That's a common misconception. And Dr. Magnus, she does a great job of debunking that. The Western Wall, it's not actually part of the Second Temple. It's part of a massive retaining wall. They call it the Temenos Wall. And it was built centuries later by Herod the Great to expand the Temple Mount platform.
Wait, so what we see today, it wasn't even part of the original structure?
Not of the Second Temple, no. Herod, he was ambitious, right? He wanted to create something grander, even more imposing. And it's that retaining wall, not the temple, that has taken on such profound meaning, especially after the earthquake back in 1564. That earthquake made it more accessible.
Wow, I had no idea. I always thought it was like a direct link back to the Second Temple.
Herod's influence on Temple Mount, it's huge, really massive. Back in the 1st century BC, he started this huge rebuilding project, doubled the size of the platform, and essentially he created what we see today.
So all those pictures, the ones we see, the Temple Mount platform, that's Herod's vision.
Mostly, yeah. He was known for his grand architectural projects. And this was no exception. We're talking colonnaded porches, the royal stoa, this complex network of gates. He incorporated architectural styles from other cultures, not just Roman.
It's almost like he was making a statement, showing off the power, the grandeur of the site. And I read about these underground arches. They call them Solomon's Stables, and they support the platform.
Yeah. They're underneath the southern extension of the platform. Amazing, isn't it, to think that they were literally building on top of history?
If we could just peel back the layers, who knows what we'd find down there.
It would be incredible. And speaking of uncovering history, we got to talk about the Sorg inscriptions. Those were like ancient keep-out signs, warning non-Jews, telling them, don't enter the restricted areas of Temple Mount. And the punishment? Death.
Were you serious? Just for stepping into the wrong area?
That's how seriously they took it, the sanctity of that space. And we have those inscriptions, one was found in Istanbul, another one was discovered right there in Jerusalem, and they give us like a glimpse into those ancient laws, how strict they were.
It's chilling thinking about how these little details, these inscriptions, they can just transport us back in time, make history feel so real.
Exactly. That's the magic of studying Temple Mount. It's this constant dialogue between past and present, right? It's a place where all those layers of history, they're just woven together. It's remarkable.
It really is. But Herod's story doesn't just end there, right? The Temple Mount, its construction, it kept going even after he died.
Right, yeah. It was finally finished, right before the first Jewish revolt against Rome. Can you imagine the timing, all that work?
And then, disaster. The Romans, they destroy the Second Temple in 70 AD. And Jerusalem, it's left in ruins for decades. It's hard to even imagine the scale of that destruction, right? The loss of such a sacred site.
It really was a turning point, a devastating blow for the Jewish people. And, to add insult to injury, Dr. Magnus, she mentions that later on, the Temple Mount, it was used as a garbage dump during the Byzantine period.
A garbage dump. That seems so disrespectful given its history.
It does, doesn't it? But it shows you the power dynamics at play. The Byzantine Christians, they were in control then, and they saw it as a symbolic way to assert their dominance, to diminish the significance of what was there before.
It's a reminder, isn't it, of how power shifts over time, how one culture's sacred ground can become, another's garbage dump. But, history, it has a way of persisting. So how does Islam enter the picture?
This is where things get even more layered. In the late 7th century AD, under the Umayyad Caliphate, they built the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. And here's where it gets really interesting. There's a theory, and it's that the Dome of the Rock, it was intentionally built on the exact site of the Second Temple.
Wow. That's a bold statement, isn't it?
Yeah.
Building right on top of what was, for centuries, Judaism's most sacred space.
Yeah.
That must have been, incredibly controversial.
Oh, absolutely. But it highlights the complexities of history. How different groups, they lay claim to the same space, imbue it with their own meanings, their own beliefs.
Oh, so if they built directly on top of the Second Temple, wouldn't there be something left underneath? Some remnants, some kind of archaeological evidence.
That's the big question. It's what drives so much of the fascination with Temple Mount. Unfortunately, Dr. Magnus, she speculates that, after centuries of destruction, rebuilding, repurposing, there might be very little left of those original temples. underneath the Dome of the Rock.
It's like a historical palimpsest, right? With layers upon layers written and rewritten, obscuring what came before. It makes you wonder, will we ever truly uncover those secrets buried beneath the surface?
That's the beauty of archaeology and history, isn't it? The mystery, the unanswered questions. It keeps us searching, keeps us trying to piece together those fragments of the past, even with limited access to the site itself. Every new find, every interpretation, it sheds light on this incredibly complex and contested space.
Dr. Magnus mentions that, if we could excavate under the dome of the rock, we might find some cuttings in the bedrock, maybe outlines where earlier structures stood. But after centuries of repurposing the site, it's unlikely much else would survived.
Right. And that brings us back to the Western Wall, perhaps the most potent symbol of Temple Mount today. It's amazing how many people think that it's the last remaining piece of the Second Temple.
I have to admit, I thought so too.
Oh, it's a totally understandable assumption, but as Dr. Magnus explains, it's actually a section of that massive retaining wall, the Temenos Wall, built by Herod the Great to expand the platform. The Western Wall, its significance came much later, after that earthquake in 1564, when it was exposed and became more accessible.
So much for received wisdom. It just goes to show you can never take anything for granted when it comes to history.
Yeah.
Especially with a place as layered and complex as Temple Mount.
Exactly. It's the perfect example of how something that seems straightforward on the surface can be anything but, and that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We've uncovered the geography of Temple Mount. We've explored how important it is to those three major world religions. We've even debunked some common myths along the way.
And yet, as you said, so much remains hidden, right? So what do you think the future holds for this site? I mean, will we ever fully unlock its secrets?
That's the question, isn't it? The million-dollar question. It's something that, scholars, archaeologists, people of faith, they've been grappling with this for centuries. Will we ever be able to fully excavate the site? Will technology give us a way to see beneath the surface without disturbing its sanctity? Will it become a symbol of peace and cooperation? Or will it remain a focal point of tension? Only time will tell.
It's almost overwhelming to think about all the possibilities,
Yeah,
the unknowns.
it is, but that's also what makes it so compelling. The mystery, the unanswered questions. They challenge us, right? To keep searching, to keep learning, to keep engaging with the complexities of history.
Really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Temple Mount, it's been this focal point for so much history, so much faith, so much conflict.
Yeah, it's like this microcosm, right, of human history. The way the passages keep shaping the present, and even with all the destruction, all the changes, the power of belief, it endures.
I feel like we've been on this journey, right, back in time, walking those ancient streets, picturing the rituals, the empires, all clashing, and all on this tiny piece of land.
And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're not just talking about facts, dates and names. We're trying to make history come alive, connect it to our own lives, help us understand how those events, those beliefs, they still resonate today.
Because let's face it, Temple Mount, it's not just some historical relic. It's still a place where there's so much tension, religious tension, political tension. I mean, it's a flashpoint for conflict, a place where different narratives, different claims to truth, they collide.
It's a constant reminder, isn't it, that history, it's not just something that happened in the past. It's alive, it's unfolding, and it shapes the world we live in, right now.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I got to ask, what do you think the future holds for Temple Mount? I mean, considering everything we've talked about, its religious significance, the layers of history, the ongoing tension, what do you see happening?
The million-dollar question, right? It's something that scholars and archaeologists, people of faith, they've been wrestling with this for centuries. Will we ever be able to fully elevate? Will technology give us a way to look beneath the surface, without disturbing the sanctity of the site? Will it become a symbol of peace, a symbol of cooperation? Or will it remain this point of contention?
So many possibilities, so many unknowns. It's almost dizzying to think about.
It is, but that's also what's so amazing about it. The mystery, the unanswered questions, they challenge us to keep searching, to keep learning, to keep trying trying to understand.
It reminds us, right, that the journey itself, the journey of discovery, that's just as important as the destination. And even if we never fully unlock all those secrets of Temple Mount, the act of searching, of questioning, of trying to understand, that's what really matters.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Well, to all our listeners out there, we encourage you, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, keep diving deep into this fascinating world all around us. We'll be back soon with another deep dive. But until then, keep those brains buzzing.